Jesus, thank you, and I pray this in your name. Amen. Well, friends, you can have a seat. And if I have not met you yet, my name is Mark, and that's what my parents call me anyhow. And I'd love to be called the same, different titles and hats, but that is what they call me. I'd love to meet you. If we haven't said hi, I'd love to meet you later on and get to know you. It's good to be back in here. Last week, 4th of July, how many of you were down in the pavilion? We had a good crew last week. It's like at 7:28. I'm like, oh, there's 8 people here, but there's 8 people here. We're going to bring it. And I don't know what happened in the next few minutes. We had a good 50 people down in that pavilion. But to go up, and I'll just say this now. It was a first for me last week to sit next to a British man on a grave to celebrate our independence from Britain. Last week I'm sitting there with Mark Agar. Some of you know his awesome family, and I'm like, is this why you've been quiet the whole evening? You're not talking because you don't want them to hear where you're from? It was funny, but we had a good laugh last week. It was fun to worship with you and be able to go to the Word and worship and then go up and see Atlanta light it up last week, which is pretty sweet. You can see where stimulus checks have gone to fireworks. Well, friends, I just want to kind of give you an overview as well. Sammy mentioned it well, but after the service, so if you have a question about this campaign, we have an FAQ sheet that will be on the screen. It's accessible to you all as well through the email if you haven't gotten that. There's maybe 10 things we just addressed. Maybe some of you are like, wait, I don't understand why we're doing this. We're not at max capacity. What is our growth projection? What is our end goal? Do we want to be a mega church? Do we want to be a mini church? If you have any questions, be brave after this. We want to address whatever we can and make sure to cover it from the stage. I'll have some sharp minds up here so I can step out if need be, and sharp minds can present what needs to be presented. And so that'll be right after the service today. It might be 4 minutes long. It might be 45 minutes long. It's up to you and your stomachs that will be growling. That's why we do it before lunch. Just to give you a heads up too, the next 2 weeks, we're going through this pocket series called Open Hand. We'll talk more about this later on. We started last week and kind of kicked it off. If you missed it, then I'll kind of give a little recap of what we went through. But August 1st, I want to do this once a year. I'm just going to walk through why the Bible is true. I will do this at least once a year. And I do this, and I like talking about this stuff, but honestly, as I prepare this, it's a little sad for me that we've gotten to the point in culture where we have to do this. Because I feel like in a way it's like saying a 35-minute presentation on the scientific evidence that Krispy Kreme donuts taste good. We're going to zoom in on this micro camera that your taste buds as they wiggle and twitch as the donut goes in. What happens to your nervous system? We can look at all that, but when you see someone's reaction when they eat a Krispy Kreme donut, you're like, sign me up. I want to try this. Well, Christians, we have not done a very good job of showing Christ to the world. And that's why we have to go through some of these things. So I like talking about it. I think it's necessary, but I prefer to talk about other things. But if you have a neighbor or a friend or a family member that's on the fence with the Bible, I know in middle school, early high school, for me, this was a fictional book. And then I started doing historical research. And I started to be surrounded by people that were sold out. And from the taste of this, they had evidence of fruit in their life. That'll be August 1st. If you want to bring some buddies, obviously any Sunday. Some people ask, Mark, what are you preaching about this Sunday? Because I have a friend. I don't know what we can talk about. Any Sunday is a safe Sunday to bring a friend. You try to walk through the gospel, and I try to cater these messages to someone who maybe doesn't understand, who's on the fence with what they believe. But August 1st would be a great time to, if you want to invite the person who's not sure about the Bible, would love to walk through that and explain why we think that the Bible is true. And I look at, looking at the failures of Christians, I look at myself in the mirror. I am so bad in so many areas. The number one area I fail in my walk as a Christ follower is in giving. You're looking at a very selfish man this morning. I just caught my wife's eye. I'm not going to look at her for a little bit because she's like, oh yeah. It's just not who I am. And the battles I fight and the things that I try to improve in life, it is giving. And so this series, I know last week we talked about it, it's kind of like this athletic approach as we get ready for the Olympics in a couple weeks. And they just announced they can't have spectators, which for us is who cares? But still, it just enhances in performance. So it's going to be weird. But as we think about athletes in the season, getting ready for the Olympics in Tokyo, I look at these next few weeks as kind of like hill sprints. So for those of you who exercise, those of you who have a routine, those of you who run, you know that there are gains from the pain. So these next few weeks, we're going to maybe feel a little pain. Maybe you're sitting there like, Mark, why? Why do we have to talk about giving? Mark, we feel like a dead horse and you're just kicking us in the rib cage. Well, why do we even talk about this in July? This is supposed to be for December when hearts are in the right place, right? Well, we're going to throw that out and just go for it. I think it's just important to talk about the beauty of giving and the joy in giving and how God wants to have us have a right posture in how we give. It's not just financial, but yes, some of this will be financial that we talk about as well. So that is the next few weeks, but I do struggle in giving. Maybe some of you have heard of the prankster on YouTube. His name is Ross, and he's with Vlog Creations. Maybe none of you have heard of him, but that's okay. 90% clean material, so I can't give a full stamp of approval. But anyhow, he does these goofy things. And this one time, as I'm thinking about this whole thing with giving and why it's tough for me, but I get this kind of a biblical approach sometimes to giving, I think, how selfish of me that I would think that I own anything. Thinking theologically. Nothing is ours. Well, Ross went down to our car show and he brought a rental car. And he's showing off his rental car and there's cameras everywhere. He has the Hurt sticker on his car. He shows up, hood is up. He knows nothing about engines. And all these car guys are walking around and they see the Hurt sticker on the windshield. And he's like, yeah, man, this is my car. And he's like, yeah, here's the diffuser that flips the tube with two lock pulls. And the people he has no idea what he's talking about. But I look at this prank from Ross, and I look at my life, I'm like, this is so like me. Like trying to say, hey, this is my stuff. This is mine, mine, mine. And really, we own nothing. Even my wife and I look at our kids as these great 3 rentals as a gift that we can raise up worshiping vessels to Jesus, but get them for a short time frame in our home to mold them. So we really own nothing. I remember years ago, and Mom, this story is for you. I hope you don't remember this. But when I was 12, Christmas morning, as we opened the gifts, and there was always this panic in our house to last minute trying to figure out what to give. And I remember finding this beautiful rooster tail lure in the aisle at Walmart. I remember seeing this a few days before Christmas. I'm like, my mom would really want that. Yeah, she would really want that rooster tail. It's a spinner lure for trout fishing. She would really like this. Oh, yeah, So I remember buying this and wrapping it under the tree. And you see Mom's look on her face as she unwraps it. And everyone's around, right? And she opens it. She's like, oh, Mark, what is it? Well, Mom, it's a rooster tail lure spinner for trout fishing. Oh, cool. Thank you, Mark. You know, kind mother that she is. It's very nice. Moving on to the next gift. As the months go by, I notice this rooster tail is getting a little dusty. Like, hey, Mom, do you mind if I just took it out and just to spin it and use it and see if it works? Yeah, Mark, sure, go ahead. Well, she can see right through this. Selfishness. Me, I would give gifts hoping they wouldn't want them so I can get them back. It's this messed up version of me that's just true. It's just so backwards. But giving is so tough for me. So this series, in a way, is really for me. And God has been molding me in my approach to giving and living life with an open hand. That's what I'm trying to live. Many of you have heard of Gary Chapman. He's an author of The 5 Love Languages. And if you're married, you know these languages. And I do think that Gary missed one. If you're a teenager or if you've been a teenager, if you know a teenager, there's a 6th one. It's called food. Physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, and gifts. Those are the primary ones. So everyone in this room has one of those. One of those are your primary as far as receiving. Usually they line up and that's how you like to give as well. And I watched my wife, not just like this last 5 weeks, I don't know why, we've just been receiving a lot from you. We've been a little overwhelmed at the generosity from this church in so many different ways, from serving to gifts. And the list is long. But at my wife, it's so obvious with her. You can probably guess what her primary love language is. It's gifts. So where I struggle the most is how she receives the most. But not just in receiving, she loves to give. I remember watching her days before Christmas. She's out there at 11:30 at night, just with the bow and the frill. And what if I did this? The packaging, just the glow of giving something. And me, I'm just like, just wrap it in toilet paper. They're just going to rip it off. Wife, what are you doing? But I am very bad at gifts. So this series is for me. So as we enter into the text today in 2 Corinthians, we look at what I call a template of how to give. Now, we enter into this kind of in the middle of a movie. If you walk into the middle of a movie, like, what did I miss this chunk before? Then you make everyone annoyed because you want to pause it and you want them to explain it. They get angry. We're kind of entering into that today in the chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians, as Paul is walking through what I say is a template of how we should have a heart posture in giving. as he's writing this letter. We'll talk about we did the AC last week. Most of you weren't here, so we'll do it again. You guys, every time you open this book, you have to realize it's hot, it's hard to touch. So we have to turn on the AC. The A stands for? Author. Good. The C stands for? Context. Good. Author and context. So author, the Apostle Paul. Writing this letter, 2 Corinthians, the second letter to the church in Corinth. He's writing this letter to them because they have a lot of issues in the church. I've mentioned this many times here before. I hear people say, Mark, if we could just be like the early church. Have you read this, what the early church was like? It was messed up in so many ways. In some ways we've improved, in some ways we haven't changed at all. But let's look at this map. I'd love to give a little context of where we are on this journey. So he's writing it here. He's writing this letter to the church in Corinth, so southern Greece. And the area is Achaia, and so we have Macedonia north of there. And so the context in this letter, he's saying, hey, there's a church in Jerusalem over here that is struggling. And so they're struggling because there's famine and they need some financial assistance. What if we pulled from you, the church in Corinth, we took off from that and we gave that to them? Now it's interesting, Paul's not just doing this just to help this church. I think about what Thomas of Assisi said, hey, it's in the giving that we receive. He knew that the church in Corinth needed a reboost. They need this time to kind of redeem themselves, to think outside of themselves and to actually give. And maybe this morning you're thinking, Mark, the last thing I want to hear about is giving because my family situation is so tough, because the financial situation this last year is so tough. Everything is so tough. Medical things are so tough. Uncertainty of this next year is so tough. Why would we think about giving? When we're in a season, maybe we should just be receiving. Well, friends, as we walk through the next few weeks, I will show you from God the power and the beauty of what it is like to give and look outside of yourself. And how really that and this circle will go around, and usually it helps us when we give. So Paul is giving this chance to this church to exercise this. He's writing this church as a correction letter. So Paul, he even said he wasn't a very good public speaker. He wasn't eloquent in his delivery. There's many times I'm up here, I'm fumbling with my words. I'm like, should I be doing this, God? There's something else I could be doing in life, but use me as you do. So Paul felt a similar thing. And so they had other people rising up in this area that were better speakers. And so the church, all of a sudden their heads are turning. Okay, we have these letters of truth. Paul visited us. We know all this about Paul and the gospel. But here are these eloquent communicators, flashy ones, the ones with nice shoes, those ones that capture our attention, the ones who are maybe even teaching a false gospel. So Paul is writing this as a correction letter, talking to them about true Christian leadership is not about status. It's not about flair. It's not about flash. It is about Jesus. He's writing them to remind them that we are slaves to our master, Jesus. I love that because Jesus is the only master where his slaves are free. And yet we want to be with him. We could call ourselves bond slaves, like it's this chosen thing to follow him as a master, the loving, perfect master. And he's reminding this church in Corinth, this is who we serve. And it's not about us being impressive. It's us following the way, following the master. And then Paul reminds them too that his life reflected Jesus' life in suffering and in pain. And right now, even as we're worshiping this morning, the band it's so hard to come up here sometimes because everything's so great. I love our worship team. But this morning I was thinking about all the churches in the area in Atlanta. There are a lot of churches here. Think about all of the churches that put forth, I would say it's called the prosperity gospel. I don't know if the word gospel can be tied to that. But this whole thing of health, wealth, and wisdom, if you give enough, or if you have enough faith. And I look at these letters from Paul, I'm like, this is completely contrary to what Paul is saying, to what is the true gospel. The true gospel is suffering. There's probably going to be pain if you follow Jesus. Jesus had pain and suffering. His immediate followers had pain and suffering. They were not rich and wealthy. They did not prosper in a financial way. But obviously God can bless us in different ways so that we can give. And there's some of you who have been blessed in different ways financially. That way you can give, which we're so thankful for. So Paul is reminding this church. He's saying, hey, don't forget generosity. How about you raise money as a relief gift to our brother church in Jerusalem? giving them a chance. So I'll give you a little context. We don't have this on the screen, but you have to go back because in the movie, if you get it right in the middle, you have to go back a little bit. So chapter 8, Paul says this. It's not up here. Paul says this in chapter 8, in verse 14. He says, at the present time, your abundance will meet their need, so that one day their abundance may also meet your need, and thus there may be equality. So Christians looking after Christians, checking on each other. I love our relationship with Mount Harmony as we check with them. They check with us, and here they are, this mother wing over us as we're trying to get our feet off the ground. But checking on them. This is in the Bible as the Christians are watching out for the Christians. I talked about last week, our missions team is doing such a great job. A few weeks ago, as they met, had a retreat to think about how we can mobilize 130 people that call On Mission Church home, how we can mobilize you to think locally, that's great, but also to the ends of the earth. How can we get you out there to get the good news of Jesus out there, get you uncomfortable, and to get out there? There's beauty in that, but I look at this, I'm like, oh yeah, let's not forget us. Let's not forget us. And last week I lifted up Sarah Scanlon. She's here today. It's so great to have Sarah here. And her crucial role in InReach is on our Wives Council to think about us. If one of you are going through a tough situation, if you're not in a small group and we don't want you to fall through the cracks, as Sarah is leading the way to make sure that our people are taken care of, focusing on InReach. So modeling this after what Paul is saying. So he's given this charge to this church in Corinth to give financially to a struggling church in Jerusalem. So let's do this. Let's look at this. Verse 3, looking at 3 verses today. This is in chapter 9. Verse 3 says this. Paul says, but I'm sending the brothers. So this church, give them more context, they needed a little urging. So he's sending in the bros. I'm sending in the brothers in order that our boasting about you in this matter should not prove hollow, but that you may be ready as I said you would be. I love the word boasting. He's saying that our boasting about you in this matter. He's saying, okay, we've been telling people that you're going to give big. So he's like giving this competitive edge. We talked about last week how in Greek culture, the Olympics were massive. Paul talks in athletic terms often because the people respond that way. They understand that the whole idea of like running the race and this on a box like this, doing all those things is athletic comparisons. He says, I've been boasting, guys. So you're ready to give. You've had a year of awareness. This is coming. Are you guys ready to walk the talk? He's given them a challenge. Are you ready to actually walk this and not just say things? So we believe the brothers are Titus and 2 others we just don't know. So Paul's sending in Titus and a couple other guys just to check on them and get the arrangements figured out for this gift that they want to send to the church in Jerusalem. Let's look further from here. Verse 4 says this. Verse 4 says, for if any Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. Now, last week we noticed there's a little bit of passive language from Paul. He starts off chapter 9 being like, oh, I don't have to talk about this with you guys. And I used the comparison last week. It's like if you see someone parked at Home Depot way over the line and you see them come to their truck and you're like, oh, I don't have to tell you about parking your truck really well. Looks like you could probably figure it out someday. Gasoline on the fire, right? Those things usually don't go well. Things usually blossom from there. But Paul started off with very passive language. And now he's getting a little bit more firm. Because he said before, he's usually more firm in his letters than he is in person. He's saying, if the Macedonians coming south, they come with me and find you unprepared, not to say anything about you, they would be ashamed of being so confident. So, are you going to own up? Are you going to give? And our one thing for today, I didn't catch this earlier, I want to make sure I say this now. One thing for today is this. Our one thing is, if we can find it here, our one thing, I have to go to my notes. Here it is, thank you. Welcome to the joy of generosity. He's inviting this church to embrace the joy that comes from generosity. Now, sending in the brothers for this kind of accountability push for them to get this extra poke and this prod that they can actually give. But there is joy in generosity. Verse 5 says this. He says, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and finish the arrangements for the generous gift that you had promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. Now, Paul, with this push, the key words are at the end in this last sentence. But there are so many different logistics involved in this than what we have today. Like if we have a campaign going now and you're going to get advertisements the rest of your life, we just can't escape from them. My whole life on YouTube, I feel like I'm just waiting for skip ads, just waiting for that, waiting and waiting sometimes forever. Ads all the time. But for us, if we do give financially to a GoFundMe or to church or to a charity, an organization, it is very easy for us to give financially in a digital way. But Paul is sending in the brothers because there are so many difficulties to get this money from this church in Corinth to Jerusalem, 800 miles away, to take this money from them. We're talking coins, we're talking different, maybe bags of coins for whatever it was, however they gave, to get that all the way over this dangerous journey, all the way to Jerusalem. This took a lot of logistics. So Paul is sending in a team to figure out how to transport this and to also give them a poke. But friends, this morning, my favorite word, I should say, is the word generous. Are you ready to give a generous gift? You want this to be a generous gift. Well, what does generous mean? We hear it all the time. Generous is a person showing a readiness to give more of something, as money or time, than is strictly necessary or expected. So above and beyond. Church, give a generous gift. The question for you is, are you a generous person? If you were to pass away this week, would that be something said from your funeral, that they lived a life that was generous with open hands? Or myself and my check, well, Mark, that probably wouldn't be mentioned from your funeral. I held things kind of tight in my life. But I want to be known as someone who was generous in giving. That's why I want to exercise this in this series, because I want to live as a generous person. Well, friends, our one thing is, welcome to the joy of generosity. Some of you have tasted that in giving. There's joy in giving. Well, friends, as we are giving, I want to give you 5 things that you can remind yourself that you are declaring when you give. These are 5 declarations that I want you to know that are from God, that every time you give with your time, talent, or treasures, these are 5 things that you are declaring to the world. And here's the list. Number 1, that you are blessed. Well, we say blessed all the time. Sometimes I want to do a full definition of what this means. Sometimes we just use it out of terms all the time. Well, bless you. It's only for if you sneeze. And that's just where we hear is in sneezing. But it says this in Deuteronomy 16. Every man should give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. Let me read this again. Deuteronomy 16. Every man should give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. Also, you were declaring this. Number 2, you were declaring that you are righteous. You're righteous not because of something you've done, but because you're clothed with the righteousness of Christ. Because of what he did in his death, burial, and resurrection, you are clothed in righteousness. You are showing people that you are righteous. Proverbs 21 says, the righteous gives and does not hold back. You can show people this righteousness in your giving with an open hand. Number 3 is this. You declare that you are obedient to the gospel. You're obedient to the gospel. 2 Corinthians, later on, we'll cover this in the next couple of weeks. Paul says this, for your generosity to them, the church in Jerusalem, and to all the believers will prove that you are obedient to the good news of Christ. Me, my stingy life, is a bad example of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Living life with an open hand, realizing we own nothing. That is showing the gospel to the world. Number 4, you declare when you give that you love God. And you might be thinking, well, I know atheists that are so into giving. Yes, I believe they can give. I don't think they can justify their giving and what they do with charity, but they can. You declare that you love God. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his only son. If you become a follower of Jesus, you get the Holy Spirit. And you get to show spiritual gifts that he gives to you. Everybody that's a follower of Jesus has at least one spiritual gift, a gift from God. Not to hold, not to be like, this is my gift to show myself off. No, to pass it on and to give it and to edify and use it in the church. That's the point of a gift. Number 5, when you give, you declare that you trust God. This is tough for me. I struggle sometimes in trusting people. I'm very slow to warm up. I love people. I love being around people, but it takes me a while to really get to know them. And now as the years go by in ministry, I've seen enough behind the scenes with people and just weird situations, and just it's tough to trust people sometimes. But I know that we're in a fallen world. But when you give with an open hand, you declare that you trust God. 1 Timothy 6 says this, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. The words of Paul again. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all that we need for our enjoyment. Well, friends, I just want to give you information. The next 2 weeks, we're going to have stations in here after this service that you literally can walk to exercise living life with an open hand. And if this morning you're sitting here like, yeah, what can we do this year? As school kickoff is coming and we get fall around the corner, and remember we're trying to think some new commitments and a new season of life. We want to give you a chance next week to literally walk around and exercise giving. For example, we will have a table that will be a station just to give to another church. So gift cards to the staff of the Square or Mount Harmony, we'll have it on there. If you just want to give and maybe sponsor a pastor at that church just to support them. We want to think locally too. We'll have some local options with who we've partnered with. And also, if you want to give more here On Mission, or if you want to give to the campaign, we'll have a sign-up table. If you want to serve this year, if you're sitting back on the outside scenes, you're like, I'm not sure what to do. If you've gone through On Track, you're still not sure, we'll have a sign-up table with options where you can sign up to give your time and your talent. So we'll give you a chance the next 2 weeks to exercise this. And August 15th, Sammy talked about it. I am pumped for that day. We can stop talking about it. We can go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus here in this area and go serve and give with our time, talent, and our treasures in this community. So friends, we want to welcome you to the joy of generosity. It's more of a heart posture as we give. So when we give, it should be generous. It shouldn't be grudgingly, as the words that Paul uses. So what does it mean to be generous? Well, in the next few weeks, we'll unwrap also more of the heart posture that we need to have as we give, and the beauty and how God can show up in those moments. Well, friends, maybe this morning, as we think about giving, I don't want us to forget about thinking of the beauty of Jesus when we give. It's easy just to throw information out there. Hey, did you know this? Did you know that? I don't want to do that. I want us really to focus on Jesus. As we exercise this in this series called Open Hands, I want to think about really what Jesus has done for us. And maybe some of you have heard this 1,000 times. Maybe some of you have never heard this before if you're tuning in online. But Jesus is our model for why we give. As he gave up his seat of royalty and riches, and he came down to earth to embrace poverty and suffering and pain. And as he literally gave everything for us to be obedient to the Father because he loves you so much. He loves you so much. It's a love you can't really understand. And if you don't ever feel loved, I want you to think about Jesus and what he's done for you. Is God sent his perfect, only Son to die on a cross to make a way for you to be forgiven for the wrongs that you've done. And it's only through him. So we model this giving after him. And no, you cannot be saved through your giving. I talk to so many people who say, if I just give enough, if I'm just good enough, I can earn points to God. And that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. It's everything that Jesus has done that we could never do. You just have to believe in that. It's a free gift of grace. And today, if you've never done that before, we're going to have some elders in the back today that would love to pray with you. I will be in the back today for a little bit. I would love to pray with you. And if you're watching this online, write some comments and contact the church. We would love to talk with you and pray with you as well to embrace your journey as becoming a follower of Jesus Christ. Church, let's live with open hands. As I pray for you now, I want you to extend your hands just like this with your palms open. I want you to I want to give you a chance to think in life, okay, where can you live with an open hand? What have you been going like this with your time, your talent, your treasure, like grudgingly holding on to something? How can God pry those fingers and have you live in a way that you can experience the joy of what it means to give. Let me pray for us. Jesus, please help us as a church to be generous. God, help me as a guy that's just so tough. I don't want to talk about this, God. It's so tough for me. I have my fingers wrapped around so many things as far as my stuff and my time and my treasure and talent. God, help me to be a giving man. Help me not to be selfish, God. Help this church body as these people think about what it is in their life that they've been holding on to. God, we pray for a conviction. Help us to be a church that embraces the beauty of the reflection of you as you gave up so much, Jesus. We want to be like you. Help us as a church to live with open hands. And Jesus, we trust you're doing something amazing here at this church. I thank you for the generosity already. But God, we want to do more. Compelled by your love, out of joy and a response to you. So Jesus, I'm so thankful for you. And I pray this in your name. Amen.